All right, I say we go ahead and get started. I know Sunday afternoons are precious to everyone. We've got 12, and I think you all have this announced to you as we log on that this is being recorded. And it's being recorded so that if you have friends or loved ones that are unable to attend, we'll have a recording available for them. And we already have 3 or 4 people signed up to receive it. And so people can watch at their leisure. And so, with that said, I want to thank you all. We could not be more excited about this effort and engaging Davidson citizens in science and helping out with the project of conservation around here. And so, with that said, I'm going to hand it over to our expert in conservation, David Cable.
Uh-oh. I don't know about that title, but I'm delighted to be here and really appreciate everybody's involvement. The Conservancy only works because of the community engagement that we have, and delighted to see a lot of you. I wish we were all in person, and I will look forward to spending time with each of you, maybe slogging around in the creek, and really appreciate your interest in this effort. We're very specifically calling this a pilot because we don't really know how this is going to work out, and appreciate everybody's faith in the process. It'll be a learning experience for us, and I think we're hopeful that it will expand out to not only include more dimensions of the West Branch over time, but also other venues across town. This in different areas of science and the environment. This effort is really a merger of two kind of separately emerging um, uh, efforts. The first was initiated by Steve Justice, who's on the phone and kind of volunteer leading this effort. And Steve and I and Bruce Batman, and there might have been someone else as offshoots of the Livability Board, started talking about different ideas of citizen science. And we had a lot of good time, kind of blue sky in that effort, but had a hard time getting our arms around a specific starting point. And so with that as one initiative, the other initiative that ended up colliding with this one, or maybe merging is a better way to put it, is the restoration project of the West Branch, which many of you may know is just about to really get underway in a significant proportion. The West Branch section, beginning from Gray Road down to the southern terminus of Fisher Farm, is about to begin this pretty major restoration project that the first phase of which was the small tributary that goes from the main stem of the West Branch to the west over to Davis Road. And that little trib has been done. This was a 3-phase project. That was the first phase. The second phase is from Gray Road down to the southern boundary of Abersham Park. And the third phase is basically all of the area in and around Fisher Farm. It was originally slated to be a $10 million project. The county was paying for this out of stormwater funding. It was approved back, I think, in 2014 by the town board. And then there was quite a lull in the period before they actually activated it. And before they reactivated it, we asked that there be a community engagement process around it. And Chris played a key role in that. The county, Brad Johnson, other people from the community really went down a very interesting path over a 6-month period of time, analyzing the impacts of this project. And there were several things that emerged from that community engagement process. The first was that we were able to make some suggestions to lighten the impact of the project. And for those of you who are unaware of it, a stream restoration project of this type removes basically everything from the corridor, all the trees, all the vegetation, to a large degree the soil. The banks are cut back and shelved, and the stream is essentially completely rebuilt. And in the process of doing that, which is done under the best of intentions, there's a pretty massive assault on the environment of that corridor. And for projects that are in the lower parts of watersheds, as this one is, these projects can be quite controversial in terms of their cost-benefit analysis, particularly given an $8 to $10 million cost and kind of long-term ecological benefits. Is this a good trade? Is this a good use of public dollars? and are there some alternatives to it? So we pushed pretty hard on that. There was some really good discussions. The Conservancy played more of a facilitating role than an opinion role, and we tried to bring science to bear as much as we could. The project got redesigned slightly, lightened the load. All the soil that will be spoiled from out of the excavation will now be moved off of Fisher Farm in Abersham, and that was quite a good accomplishment. The cost of the project was whittled down by between $1 and $2 million, and we felt pretty good about that result. But nonetheless, there is still this lingering issue of whether or not the cost benefit of this really makes sense, and where is the science on all of this, knowing that this is in the bottom 10% of a watershed, and there's all of the upper reaches of the watershed in Iredell County over which Mecklenburg has no control. And so we said, well, let's try to make this a pilot project in terms of researching the impacts. And this is where Chris and Brad really started to help frame up a proposal to the county to help pay for some funding to have citizen science, and also for student and faculty research of the stream to determine what kind of an ecological lift we would actually get out of this project. And part of that is the citizen science program. So that's where the citizen science initiative that Steve really raised as a great idea came together with the West Branch project. And we said, well, this is the pilot. Let's land on this and see what we can do. And so that's a little bit of the background on how we ended up where we are. And we're excited about it. I think this will complement the work that you all will do, will complement nicely the work that Chris and Brad and others at the college will do, and Chris will tell you a little bit more about that. The last thing I want to say about this, just to set the stage on the project, is that this is part of a much larger effort going on at Fisher Farm and Abersham to really enhance the biodiversity of that unbelievable 545 acres out there that our region benefits from. It has not been particularly well managed over time, and we are trying, starting with Fisher Farm, to really increase and enhance the biodiversity of that land and the ecosystems that are there. And some of the components of that project, in addition to the stream improvement and the research around it, include restoration of a pretty significant prairie, certainly a lot of invasive plant management, which is now underway. We're doing a lot of tree planting out there, which you may have noticed, and that will continue. We started a program through Trail Masters for enhancing the trails. Some of the trails are poorly done, and they're not maintained, and they're fall line trails that need to be rerouted for erosion purposes. And then Kevin Smith, head of the biology department, is doing a wonderful biodiversity in a 20-acre forested area out there that I think is going to be fun to watch over time. And with that came a user survey of the park. So I won't go on and on about that, but really exciting time for Fisher Farm and Abersham. And this piece of it, this pilot through citizen science, is an important component of that. So that gives you a little bit of a background on it. And Carly, I'm not sure if that's all you had in mind for me to cover at this point, but I'm happy to do anything else that you think is important to set the stage here.
No, I think that's ideal. I think that's a perfect launch for Chris to explain a little more of the science piece of it if he wants to take it from there. Does anybody have any questions for Dave at this point, though? Okay, great. Chris?
Thank you all very much. I'll stop talking here, but I can't say thanks enough. We are a very small agency relative to most land trusts in the state, and it works because of this great community support and cultural alignment we have with conservation in this community. And I'm just delighted to be here on this call with all of you and look forward to being in the field with you. And this is a pilot. We are constantly trying to do things better, and this will be a learning experience for all of us. And as you experience it, do not be bashful about making recommendations on how we can make it more productive, more fun, more interesting. If there's any risk involved that you're concerned about, don't hesitate to raise your hand. All right, we want to hear from you and make this really a fun, worthwhile process for certainly for the environment and the information, but for all of you too. So thank you very much for being here. Carly, I'll stop talking.
Don't stop. All right, Chris.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm Chris Paradise. I'm a professor of biology and environmental studies at Davidson College. And I'm trained as an ecologist and an entomologist. So insect ecology is my area of interest. My colleague, Brad Johnson, is a geologist. He does what's called surface geomorphology, which if you give him 5 minutes, he'll talk to you for an hour about the fascinating world of geomorphology. I don't know much about it, but he and I have been collaborating for years, mostly on stream work. And so his interest is in how streams and the land surrounding the stream sort of interact with each other and move materials downstream and affect the bank in terms of erosion, sedimentation. Where does the sediment come from that impacts the streams? And I'm going to stop talking about his side of it right there because he knows way more about it than I do. But the way that we've interacted together is that I've been studying the aquatic insects in local streams for many years, on and off, and so we can ask questions about how things like the flashiness of streams, that is, how quickly they rise after a rainstorm and how quickly the water goes back down, how that then affects. So he can quantify discharge and erosion rates and all of those things. And then we can see how they correlate with the insect communities that are living in the streams. And what we're interested in with the restoration is, well, we saw this as an opportunity because we were already collaborating and we already have sort of the infrastructure in place. We saw this as an opportunity to look at from my perspective, the community of insects that are in the stream before the restoration, then during the restoration, and then track afterwards. And I actually have some data down in Torrance Creek that we've collected on and off over the years. And Torrance Creek restoration project in the Torrance Creek Greenway happened, I think, 11 or 12 years ago. And so we've tracked it over time, and we've been able to compare data that I had collected right during that time period to more recent data. And we can do the same thing with the West Branch Rocky River as well. What we're interested in, yes, is there a question? Oh, I thought I heard somebody say something. What we're interested in here with this citizen science project is to get a better handle on the dynamics of the system. So one of the things we know about aquatic insects is they don't just swim around in the water. They live and attach themselves to substrate, and that could be rocks, gravel, large woody debris, leaf packs, or other sort of areas of heterogeneity or variability in the stream. In part, that's where they feed, but they also find refuge there. But as you know, streams are very dynamic ecological systems, and things move around all the time. And what we're trying to do with this project is to get a handle on the dynamics of the system. And I think, Carly, you're going to talk more about the specifics of what we're planning on doing with the camera traps, right? The cameras, or not really camera traps, but the phone setups.
Yes.
Right. And we can use that data to really to get a handle on how things change over time and how quickly things change. So rates of change. And one of the other things that I can do is go into the stream and collect insects at various points, places like log jams or where there's large woody debris, which we think is a place where the insects will congregate. And in a stream restoration, all that stuff goes away. And then they put in artificial dams and habitat that, in my personal opinion, I don't think is as high quality habitat for the aquatic insects. And so by collecting this data, we can understand the habitat requirements of the insects a little bit better, and document how important this sort of natural variability is with the insects. Okay, and I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions. Dave has a comment that the insects in the stream are a proxy for the ecological sort of stability and or quality of the stream, and he's correct about that.
So Chris, I've got a question.
Yeah, Bruce.
If everything goes away when they start the restoration, do we have baseline kind of current status of insect populations in there? You mentioned Torrance Creek, but I'm not sure if you have it for the West Branch.
We do, yes. We've been collecting data since early 2022. We don't have an extensive data set, but I've collected data in that stream over the years at different points. And what we've collected more recently actually makes me think that, like, the students that have been working on the project with me have said that there are things in the stream that I haven't seen in that stream in over 10 years. For instance, stoneflies, which are really, really sensitive to these kinds of disturbances like sedimentation and erosion. And in 22 and in 23, we found those stoneflies again. So my students are questioning whether we actually need to do the restoration, because the insect communities are indicating that the quality of the habitat is actually increased over time. So yes, we do have a baseline. Other questions?
I have a question about the reason for doing a restoration. Is it mainly to increase the ease of flows to control the flooding, or?
Well, there are many reasons to do a stream restoration, and they can range from increasing the habitat, the quality of the habitat. It could be stream flow. It could be to deal with if you go down to the West Branch, you see the banks are very incised. They're very steep. And so to deal with that, to create a riparian zone that is sloped more gently, that can filter the water a little bit better, the precipitation a little bit better, by having some more trees along the bank. And it could also be to control invasive species. So I think there are some non-native species there that are going to be taken out, right? Is that correct, Dave? That's correct, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think the county's, this program is really centered around improving water quality, knowing that erosion and turbidity are our number one bogey against, decent quality streams. We have erodible soils. We're fast urbanizing, so we have a lot of impervious surface. And the streams a lot of them have been channelized, including the West Branch, in the name of erosion or of agricultural drainage. And so that's why they get so incised, and they lose the shelf that allows them to expand during periods of storm and de-energize the stream. And instead they scour because of the way they're structured. Streams are really designed to meander, and none of these streams meander. So it's really re-engineering the stream to better the quality of the water as measured by the insect population, which is kind of used as the standard by EPA and others for what good water quality is versus impaired. Did I say that right, Chris? Is that fair?
Yes. Other questions? What are some of the invasive species? I think the ones that I referenced are plant species, right, Dave? I'm not sure I know which ones they are.
Autumn olive, which is Elaeagnus, and privet, some kudzu, although not as much. Those are really the primary ones, and then there are a lot of other ones that are probably, there's mimosa out there. Obviously, that's throughout the area. But if you walk through the woods of Fisher Farm, most of what you see is kind of a combination of privet and autumn olive, and that creates a monoculture and prohibits the trees from reproducing, and it really it fights against biodiversity, I guess, maybe the way to say that. And so by eliminating those invasives, we will improve the biodiversity of the land over time. And the interesting part that Kevin and his students are looking at is actually sunlighting some areas in the forest, combined with invasive plant control to really improve the reproduction rates of some of the native trees. And so that work, which probably will involve some burning of the forest, will be an interesting process to track. But those two, I think, are really the ones that I see the most of. The one that has just popped up at Fisher Farm and I hadn't really seen much before is this trifoliate orange, which is just a horrendous, like Stephen King looking invasive with these huge needles. Very intimidating. And there's certainly many others, Japanese switchgrass and a lot of other things, but stiltgrass. But for the most part, the Elaeagnus and privet are really the primary ones.
Anyone else have any questions? All right. Again, I just want to echo what Dave said about how lucky we are to have Davidson College and professors like Chris and Brad here to work with in partnership. It's just a phenomenal opportunity. So you will have a chance to see Chris or Brad again at part 2 of this training, but we did want to give you kind of a broad overview of the science before we moved on. And now we're going to move on to the logistics. So Dave and Chris gave you kind of a broad sense. Now we're going to talk specifics. First of all, I want to also echo what Dave said, that this is a pilot. So this is project number 1. I'm going to walk you through some of what it looks like to walk this stretch of river, which if we haven't explained that yet, maybe we should have. That what we're really asking you to do is enter the river and walk down it for about a mile, would you say, Dave? Is that what we clocked it at? And we're going to ask you to stop at every place that we mark a log jam, a place where we've found debris has fallen either partially or fully over the river, and start to catch other debris, allow for insects to have a community behind them. You're going to be stopping at each of these spots and recording in a book that we give you observations. What's the water flow look like? Is it larger or smaller than maybe the last time you saw it? What sort of insect life do you see? All that sort of information. There's pretty much not too much information that you can give us, and you will just write it down in this waterproof book that we give you, and then you will take pictures of it from a variety of angles. And then what I'll have you do is upload that all so that Brad and Chris and their students have access to that information. And right now we have Steve and Dave and I have walked it a million times possibly, but really maybe 3 or 4, and we have gone ahead and kind of pre-marked 9 log jams and then a couple of others that are starting to become log jams. And you will have all that information on a map and in a document so that as you walk it, you're just observing the same spots. Does that make sense as a broad explanation? But because we're asking you to go down in a riverbed, we want to go ahead and show you. I'm going to share my screen with everyone and just show you a very brief slideshow. And it's just going to start at the top of the river. And I'm going to kind of give you an idea of how you're going to enter the river, and then an idea of on an average day. Now, we all know with rivers, they're dynamic environments. So Steve will talk more with you about safety and things like that. But this is just the days that we went on, what the water flow looked like. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that? Okay, great. All right, so this is our river entrance point, and I'm going to use, you can see on the top left quadrant where you're going to be coming down. So up on the top of the bank is where the path for Fisher Farm runs, and you'll come over and you come down kind of the far side, and you can either keep going down, but you're going to walk down a bank. It's kind of sandy like this into the riverbed. And then I'm sorry, Steve's about to be really featured a lot in these pictures, but then you just kind of move down through the river. In the average spot, it's about 6 to 8 inches on the days that we walked it. But again, that kind of changes day to day. This is what I talked about earlier. We marked this as a future log jam. And then we're going to get a lot of Steve time. And you can just see that we're walking down the river, looking at the different log jams from both upstream and downstream, photographing them. And then if it were you and your partner, which we will always ask you to do this project with 1 or 2 other people, just for safety and for accuracy, you would just be moving down the river like this. This is number 2. You'd be photographing them and just categorizing them, making notes on what you observe. And so places like this, you'll have to feel comfortable walking over, debris like this, a little bit of unstable environments. This is more of a limbo under.
You can tell by the look of Steve, this is serious business.
You can also tell I'm not a professional photographer. And then we're going to come here to the end just so you can see the exit out. But this kind of gives you an idea of what you will be walking through. So if you look at this, Dave is at the top of the exit point. I would use the word clamoring maybe, but you will have to be able to kind of climb out of this, and then you're just up at a grassy area and near the path again in Fisher Farm. So let me stop screen sharing and see, does anybody have any questions? All right, so this is part 1, was just a Zoom to kind of screen everybody, let you have an idea of what is going on. If you are still interested in this, at the end of the session, I will be sending an email out to all of you. If you're interested, let me know, and then we're going to go ahead and schedule a second part where we actually go out into the river and give you more specifics on it. But this was just going to be a broad overview. And then with that, if no one has any questions, I'm going to pass it over to Steve Justice, our new town board member.
Oh,
Let him talk about more details with our volunteers.
okay. Thank you, Carly. First thing is just to be safe. That's expectation here. And in that vein, Carly mentioned having pairs at least, so no one goes and does this volunteers alone. We're anticipating that we'd like to see it covered twice a month. So Carly's going to create some form of volunteer sign up, and individually you can sign up, but somebody else on this call should join you before the 2 of you decide that's the day it's going to happen. So we're going to divide the month up in halves, and there's a lot of volunteers potentially involved in this, and we don't want there to be, a 6-month wait to volunteer. So ideally we would get twice a month, the first half and the second half of the month covered. And once that's done, you're free to volunteer any other time to add to the data. So It's not like there's too many times or anything like this. So if everybody wants to jump in the water right here at the beginning to get your feet wet and get going with this and get familiar with the process, that's not going to be a problem. As you saw from the pictures, what you're going to be walking through typically is not very deep. The bottom is sandy or muddy, so it might sink. Water shoes I was wearing in these pictures, I'd recommend it. Certainly no barefoot, obviously. I had a walking stick. I wasn't carrying it in the pictures on some of our trips, and it may be helpful for you to be able to gauge the depth of a pool you're about to step in, or to balance yourself as you're sort of traversing over or across logs into what might be an unsteady foothold on the other side of the log. So a walking stick type of support might not be a bad idea to have. Chris mentioned the word flashy in terms of the stream. I didn't think he meant it was fancy. I think he means it sometimes gets very deep after a rainfall. And so the water levels, there's a gauge that we can check at time periods where their volunteers signed up, and give you a heads up if we think it's not at a level that we would expect you to safely walk. However, if you get down there and you see it and you don't feel comfortable based on the depth of the stream, it certainly is not an expectation that you have to take a risk walking through something that you don't feel is safe. The in and out of this, in terms of, Chris also mentioned the depth of the banks or the steepness of it. The entrance and exit points are a little slippery because they're muddy. They're not prepared walkways. They were just the best places that we saw to get in and out, with less steepness than others. But you'd probably have to take some care both getting in and getting out, just in terms of not slipping and falling as you sort of traverse down a bank that may be steeper than you're accustomed to walking. The other thing Carly mentioned was that there'll be a book to write in, and I think Dave mentioned this too, was that if you see a safety concern or something that hadn't been mentioned before or is new, then that the book is a place to write it in and say, I noticed this, and this may present a problem for people who come at a later date, and flag it in the book for us, or tell us. I think Carly's going to give you her contacts and my contacts to be able, she'll be the point of first contact. If you think it's particularly risky and don't want to just write it in the book, and feel free to contact us and let us know if you think something's of concern that you've seen during your volunteer time. The time it takes to do this is roughly around an hour and a half. It's a mile, but you're stopping, you're taking pictures, you're writing in the book, you're doing this sort of thing. And it could be that you may find the beginning of a new log formation that is there, that's not, it wasn't there on the walks that we did at baseline, and and you're able to add that there's a forming log jam somewhere that's not currently on the map. At some point in the experience, some people may note that, and that's important to take into account, that these first 9 log jams that we saw may not be the final number of log jams that get noted in this volunteer experience. So that's something else that when we do the next volunteer sessions, we'll talk more about. Carly, Dave, you think I missed anything from a expectation or safety perspective?
No, I don't think so, Steve. I just would piggyback on the safety part. That's job one here. Do not put yourself at risk, and take your time when you're out there. It's really not that hard to do it. It's not that rugged, but you want to be safe. And there are certainly a tremendous number of trip hazards. The water itself is not that big of a deal, but you're dealing with uneven terrain, particularly getting in and out. And then as you walk the stream, there are a lot of snags and that kind of thing. You don't have to worry about snakes or anything like that. I haven't seen anything of any concern along those lines, but you want to keep your heads up. But no, I think you did a really good job of covering it, Steve. While I have the floor here, though, just to prevent another interruption, Chris, this is a question for you. We had a wildlife enhancement collaborative meeting last week, and this is a team, just for the benefit of everybody that's here. this is a team of really interesting folks from the Wildlife Resources Commission and the college and the county and the town and the conservancy and the citizenry, all kind of overseeing this management rewilding plan. And we're not talking about putting bison out on Fisher Farm, just so we're clear on what rewilding means, as much as I'd like to do that. But Angie Grooms is on that committee, and she raised an issue about walking upstream rather than downstream so that you weren't disturbing the areas that you were observing. And I hadn't really thought about that, Chris, and I don't know, we've got it set up now from 1 to 9, I think are the station numbers, and you enter right at the Abersham southern line and you exit pretty close to the southern extent of Fisher Farm. So we're going north to south, which is the flow of the stream. Chris, does it matter whether we reverse that or not?
I think for what they'll be doing, I don't think it would matter that much. When I
Okay.
sample the insects, I always start downstream and work my way upstream.
Yeah.
Because upstream you could, the insects, what they do is if their habitat is disturbed, they just let go and they drift downstream and find another place. And when you're sampling, you don't want that to happen if you're going downstream, because that could bias your samples. But I think for this, I don't think it would be an issue.
Okay. And Chris, do you envision a potential extension of this effort to include insect sampling long term?
Well, sure. I mean, one of the things that we could do is sample. So usually what we do when we sample is we pick a 50-meter stretch of stream, and then we sample different substrate types, gravel, root bank, etc. But we could set up a study where we're specifically sampling at or just below, just downstream of the log jams. So then we could get an idea of what's actually in there. And there are some studies that have looked at that, but not enough to know to say be predictive. Just look at a log jam and say, oh, I will find a lot of good stuff there. Anecdotally, I could say that. Like when I see a habitat, I could tell my students, yeah, if we sample there, that's a good spot. We'll find a lot of good stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think we could definitely target those areas. And I think that's probably a good capstone project for a future student.
Okay. So maybe that becomes phase 2 of this. We cut our teeth on looking at the physical attributes of what's immediately observable and then advance from there.
Right, exactly.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, and this came up in the Wildlife Enhancement Committee meeting too, our collaborative. Does anybody have Merlin on their phone? The bird call? Okay. It's a very easy thing. It's from Cornell. You can download it on your phone. It's for free, and it's an amazing piece of nature tool. I mean, it's just phenomenal. If you have that and you hear birds out there and you want to make notes on what you hear, that would be really good information to have too, even though it probably doesn't have anything to do directly with what we're analyzing in the stream. But capturing different bird species that you can hear would be another mention to this that we might as well capture while you're out there.
All right. With that said, I think we're at the end of the training. Does anyone else have any questions? All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all. I can tell you, oh, Chris, I think, has a question.
It's not a question. Well, maybe it is. Dave, we had talked about, so Steve mentioned water shoes, and I have no problem using water shoes when the water's warm. But in the wintertime, if you're doing this, it can be quite cold. And we had talked, I think, about boots, like knee-high boots.
Yes.
I had made an offer at one point, and what did we decide we were going to do about that?
Sold.
What's
Sold.
that?
Yeah, I said sold. We'd like to take you up on your offer,
Oh,
Chris.
okay, okay.
Yeah, you can't-
So my laboratory has multiple pairs of boots that go up about knee high. They're not like hip waders or anything, but they're more than sufficient for this stream. Although if you go into the mud, you could overtop. So you gotta be careful when the water's cold. But we'll figure out a way that we can. I'll get a list of the sizes that I have, and then figure out a way to loan them to folks when they're heading out there. Okay. Dave, you're muted.
That would be great, Chris. If you could do that, we can try to make that as easy as possible in terms of pickup by the volunteers, and we'll figure out the coordination of that. So, but thanks for bringing that up. And speaking of that, Chris, Carly, do you want to talk a little bit about the photo points?
Sure, I will. I would love
Yeah,
to.
the stationary top of bank stuff.
Yeah. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is engage more than just you all with the citizen science program. And a great way to do that is through photo points. And these are becoming more and more popular around the country as a way to collect data. And the way it works, Dave has found these great, they're called chronologs, and they're plastic holders of your cell phone. And the way they work is you mount them on top of a post, and then you set that post into a variety of points. And we're going to set them at 5 different locations along the river where you all will be walking, although these will be up on the bank. And that we are going to position the angles so that we look at something very specific, either the downstream flow or that tributary that was already addressed earlier this year. And then as you're walking your dog one day, you place your phone in it and it calibrates the angle at a very specific point. You take a picture, and then there's an email address on the sign, and you can send that image in, and the company that we've contracted with will turn it into a time lapse over time so that you can see the change of the environment. Will trees grow in that restored part of the tributary? What will happen to the wildlife? What do you capture out there when you look at it? So it's going to be a really great opportunity, and you all can participate, but so can anyone else that's walking along the river and just wants to be part of this. It's a really neat way to engage more citizen scientists. All right. Well, with that said, I will be contacting all of you after this. I cannot thank you enough. And I can tell you guys, when I kind of stumbled into this aspect of the job, and I got to walk the river multiple times with Steve and Dave, and some of my favorite days. Like, it is so gorgeous when you're down in the river and the light streaming through and you're looking at deer track, and it's so peaceful. You feel like somebody's going to come and yell at you because it just feels like it's too beautiful and just such an amazing experience that you almost shouldn't be allowed to do it. So I really hope you guys are willing to do it. The science is amazing, but the experience is pretty phenomenal as well. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks, Carly.
Thanks,
Steve.
Dave. Steve.
Yep. Bye, Chris. Thank you.